Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davich, and I'm Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, the DeKalb County Public Library, and the AJC Decatur Book Festival, welcome to our fifth event in the 2021 Joshilyn Jackson Summer Reading Series. If, of course, you've been joining us this entire time, or if this is your first event, you can find more events in the series by going to decaturbookfestival.com and clicking on the link, and then you can register through Eventbrite for the remaining events we have in the series. And there are some truly exciting ones coming up, featuring Jennifer Saint, Nevo, Kelly Quinlan, and Catherine Greenrich. Of course, you can always join us after these events on our YouTube channels, where you can see these recorded presentations. Don't forget, you can visit either the Georgia Center for the Book YouTube channel or the Decatur Book Festival YouTube channel, and look for the 2021 Joshilyn Jackson Summer Reading Series. You can also subscribe and, of course, make sure that you turn on the alerts so you can tell when those new videos have been posted. I would like to thank, of course, our hosts, the DeKalb County Public Library and the DeKalb Library Foundation, through whose generosity we are using the Zoom account to bring these wonderful events to you throughout the summer. Of course, these events wouldn't be possible without the wonderful support and collaboration that we have with the Decatur Book Festival. It's always been a wonderful event and the cornerstone of the fall programming for the city of Decatur. And we'd also like to thank the director, Joy Pope, for coming to us and bringing us on board for these wonderful events. We, of course, would like to see the Decatur Book Festival come back, and there will be maybe a small book festival with some bit of celebratory nature this fall. And we would encourage you to sign up for the Decatur Book Festival link just to make sure that you're aware of those programs as they come about. But of course, the festival will need your help, because not only does it take so many authors and hundreds of volunteers to put on, but it also needs your support. So if you just have a few dollars lying about and you'd like to donate to a good cause, the Decatur Book Festival can be that cause for you this evening. If you'd like to order books for our authors, we, of course, are using an independent bookstore right here in Atlanta, Tall Tales Books. You can order those books this evening by either calling them at the store at 404-636-2498 or sending an email to them at info@talltalesatlanta.com. We, of course, are putting a little more information in the chat for you to do so, but we hope you will consider buying the book from one of our independent bookstores. Our independent bookstores in Atlanta and across the country have done so much during the pandemic to get books to you by mail. Some are doing pop-ups, some are doing porch pickups, and some of our bookstores in Atlanta even delivered books to people's doorsteps. They are truly the cornerstone of our literary world. And of course, we also would encourage you to buy from our Black-owned bookstores and our Black-owned businesses, because we truly want to have a just society and a diverse literary community. So this evening, once we finished our formal presentation and you would like to ask a question to any of our panelists this evening, we would encourage you to put those questions in the Q&A section. You will find the Q&A button either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. And we also have live transcription enabled for you this evening. So if you need that service, please feel free to click the closed caption button that you will find on your screen. So this evening, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests, and then we'll kick off right into our conversation with Nicki Salcedo, who is, of course, an Atlanta author and journalist, and the co-host for this series this year, along with Joshilyn Jackson. She will be heading up the conversation and taking your live questions as well. So our first author this evening is Ilona Bannister, who grew up on Staten Island and lived in New York until she married a British gentleman and moved to London. She is a dual qualified U.S. attorney and United Kingdom solicitor, and practiced immigration law in the United Kingdom before taking a career break to raise her two young sons, and unexpectedly found herself a writing career. When I Ran Away is her debut novel, and we are so pleased to have her here this evening. It is somewhere around midnight in London, so we thank her for braving the time change and staying up with us late into the evening. Nancy Johnson is a native of Chicago's South Side, where she worked for more than a decade as an Emmy-nominated award-winning television journalist at CBS and ABC affiliates in markets nationwide. Her debut novel, The Kindest Lie, has been reviewed by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times, and is featured on Entertainment Weekly's must list. It has been named one of the most anticipated books of 2021 by Newsweek, O, the Oprah Magazine, Shondaland, NBC News, Marie Claire, Elle, Good Housekeeping, Parade, Refinery 29, and many more. Nancy's work has been published on Real Simple and O, the Oprah Magazine, and has received support from the Hurston Wright Foundation, Tin House, and Kimbiblio Fiction. A graduate of Northwest University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Nancy lives in downtown Chicago and manages brand communications for a large healthcare nonprofit. Our third guest this evening is Andromeda Romano-Lax. She was born in Chicago and is now a resident of a small island off of Vancouver Island called Gabriola in Canada. She worked as a freelance journalist and travel writer before turning to fiction. Her first novel, The Spanish Beau, was translated into 11 languages and was chosen as the New York Times Editor's Choice, Book Sense pick, and one of Library Journal's best books of the year. Her next 3 novels, The Detour, Behave, and Plum Rains, reflect a diverse interest in the arts, history, science, and technology, as well as her love of travel and her time spent living abroad. Andromeda co-founded and continues to blog for 49 Writers, a nonprofit organization. She has taught fiction at the University of Alaska Anchorage, low residency MFA in creative writing program, and currently works with novelists and memoirists as freelance book coach. She currently lives with her family on a small island off the bigger island in British Columbia, where her favorite activities are trail running and paddleboarding. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we have a full docket of guests that truly span the globe tonight, from small islands to, well, larger islands, but off Europe. So right now I would like, well, Chicago is not really an island, but it's, you know, around a lot of water and a little cold and breezy. So we'll give you that, Nancy. But right now I'd like to turn it over to our host this evening, Nicki Salcedo. So Nicki, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. I'm so excited to be here tonight. Special thanks to Joshilyn Jackson, who is helping sponsor this series. What I love about Joshilyn is that when we talk about books, we both get so excited. In my mind, today is the first day of summer, June 1st, and we got a sneak peek at our summer reads. All this past 6 months, we've been reading these books. So I'm really excited to talk to the 3 of you so that everyone else can start reading these wonderful books we're going to talk about tonight. And also thank you for joining us from across the world in a year where many of us could not travel. So first of all, I'd love for each of you just to tell me a little bit about your book from your perspective, so our listeners can hear what you've put out into the world. And for this one, Ilona, I'll start with you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, I'm really excited to be here. So I'll tell you a bit about When I Ran Away. It is about Gigi. She is a New Yorker living in London. One morning, she is just in a place where everything caves in on her. Her marriage, her feelings about motherhood, and her ongoing grief about losing her brother on 9/11. And she leaves her family on the doorstep, literally, in just her bathrobe and flip-flops, and goes wandering the streets of South London. It's a story about struggles in a marriage. It's about postnatal depression. It's also about Britishness and Americanness and culture and identity and class. But it's also mostly about finding light in the darkness. How do we do that when we're in a dark place? So it's about Gigi's journey back from the edge, to accept the woman who she is rather than the woman that she was before.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Nancy, you also have a character who's maybe caught between 2 worlds. Tell us about your story.
Yeah, definitely some parallels, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Story. So yeah, my story is the Kindest Lie. It's a novel about family, sacrifice, and love, all of it at the dawn of the Obama era. And the story centers on a woman named Ruth Tuttle, who is this very successful Ivy League educated Black engineer in Chicago. and she's really on the come up. You know, the world is her oyster. Everything is going her way. She's got this great husband, wonderful job, you know, just moved into a brand new house. But she's been keeping a secret. And the secret is that she had a baby when she was 17 years old, and she walked away from her son, and she left him behind in the dying Indiana factory town where she grew up. And so she decides to go back there to her hometown to search for her son. And when she gets there, that's when she meets and forms this unlikely friendship with a poor young white boy with the nickname Midnight. And so the two of them are really searching for this sense of family connection and belonging. So they definitely have that in common, and that's what brings them together. But when they do come together, they're also on this collision course of race and class that ends up upending both of their lives.
And it is, lives do get upended, don't they?
They certainly do. You'll have to read to find out how.
You will have to read to find out. No spoilers in our conversation today, but certainly an interesting, beautiful journey. And then Andromeda, your character is delving into a past, but not necessarily her own. So tell us about your story.
Sure. And first of all, I thank you for having me. And I want to say that Ilona and Nancy, I love your books. So now let me give you my spiel about Annie and the Wolves. It's the story of a modern day historian named Ruth, who finds her life increasingly intertwined with that of her subject, the 1800s sharpshooter, Annie Oakley. So when Annie Oakley was a young girl, she was sent off to live with an abusive farm couple that she would only refer to later as the Wolves. When this novel opens, Ruth, the historian, has just received a mysterious journal that threatens or promises to expose some of the secrets that Annie Oakley has kept about this chapter in her life, as well as other secrets. But as the novel progresses, Ruth actually discovers that some of the darkest secrets and impulses that she has to face are actually her own. So this is a novel that's partly historical fiction, partly thriller, and it's really an exploration of issues like revenge, trauma and resilience, and the allure of changing the past.
And the past is alluring. I love that you said that. The past is so evocative. And in my mind, reading these three stories, I was like, the past is like calling to us, whether or not we want it to. The past might mean redemption for one of the characters. The past might mean revenge for a different character, or it's haunting for a third. I have these words associated with some of the stories. I'm not going to say which ones I associate with each book, but the past is the character. So maybe, Andron, I'll start with you and we'll work our way back. Why is history, why is the past calling to us like this?
Okay, well, first of all, that was one of the great pleasures for me, was also realizing that these three books all have that in common. It's women at a certain time in their lives, realizing that you can flee only so far, but at some point you have to face these things. So I love that parallelism. So you mentioned some words like revenge and redemption, and you had another good one, Nicki. What was the other one?
Haunting.
I would say in my book, it's all three. I would say it's all three. And I think redemption is possible when you do actually go and face those, whether they're suppressed memories or family secrets. So that's really a big part of what my book is about for multiple characters. So Annie Oakley is facing her past. Ruth is actually facing her past. And then there's actually some other characters who are as well. I guess I'll leave it there. Here, so we can hear from the others.
You'll leave it there. It feels like a cliffhanger. I love it. I love it. Nancy, maybe we'll start with haunting for you, because an action that, if we all pause and think about being 17 and all the different choices we made, what was it like for you writing that and visiting the past, and what was it like for your characters to go back to the past?
Yeah, I like that you said that, Nicki. And talking about being 17, it's a period that we can all relate to. I think we all have different experiences of being 17, but we like to think that we're so different, and that was another part of our lives that we could actually, kind of leave in the past, depending upon what that experience was like. At least that's the way I would like to think of it for myself. But I think for my character, for the Ruth in my book, she is haunted by it. So I think haunting is the perfect word to use, Nicki, for my character, because that was a long time ago. And she's coming from, it's not just leaving the baby behind, having a baby, but it's also the town and the background that she grew up in. You know, it was definitely a more poor working class community. And she says she feels like, she felt like that community's soil was like a trapdoor for her. So she felt very stuck there in many ways. And so she leaves that behind and she becomes an engineer. She goes off to Yale. Then she moves to Chicago and her whole life has transformed. But yet it's the idea that can you ever go home again? And how the past is still kind of dogging her and kind of nipping at her heels her entire life, you know, even though she's in this new marriage with this, you know, this man who comes from, you know, more of an upper middle class background. They're still, even in their conversations in their marriage, that 17-year-old girl shows up in the way that she interacts with him and how she still doesn't feel like she's enough or like she's adequate enough. And a lot of that is because of her past and who she was. And now he's pressuring her to have kids. And so that's what really forces her to have to reckon with her past. And so I think that once you read the book, though, you find that there is some redemption in there. But I think for the most part, it is about being haunted by the past and thinking about whether or not you can ever really reconcile that, never really go back. And have you ever really let go of the past?
And
The past is still a part of you.
yes, and you said like it's messy. It is messy. The past is messy. Going back and Ilona, you have the past, and sometimes the past has something we can't go back and fix, especially when there's death. Like it's always a great idea in the story to go back to your hometown, see what you can fix. How can we revise history? But what happens when we can't change the past? And I think in your story, we see some of that. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think in my story and also in the other two books, this idea of not letting go of the past, but also that the past walks with us in the present. It is a constant companion. And I think particularly in Gigi's case, where she's lost a family member, it walks with her because grief is an ongoing experience. When we witness a tragic event or when we lose someone who we love, it's not just a one-time event. It stays with us for years, for decades, could stay for a lifetime. So it's something that is always there, even as our own life moves on. Grief in particular stays with us. So one of the things that I hope comes through with Gigi is the idea that people in our lives who we know are walking with grief and who are walking with their past in their present every day, that we remember, that we help them to remember. In the book, it's 15 years since 9/11, since Gigi loses her brother. This year it will be 20 years. And though we leave things in history and time moves forward and we hear less and less about things, that is only natural. But I think that remembering the past and understanding that it walks with some people in their lives is important. And I think it's something I saw in the other books as well. That idea that it is there, it's a companion. No matter what you try to do, it's always there in the corner.
Yes. I love something you just said, which I hadn't really thought about before, about grief. And all of these stories really grapple with different types of emotional states and mental health states. We just had in the US, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. It's an important topic for us to start taking away stigma about how we feel and experience things, including grief and depression. So first of all, I do want to thank all three of you, because something writing does, I think, quite beautifully is give each of us a little healing. We're reading stories about people not like us, but yet we can feel very close to someone who, you know, experienced 9/11 in a way that I didn't, or I didn't have a small town, you know, child that I had to give up at 17, and I didn't have a connection to Annie Oakley, but I can really emotionally connect. So I think that's a very beautiful gift of these stories, is getting to some hard emotional places. So that grief that walks with us. And yet some of that maybe, is it just because we're of a certain age? We've reached the middle point, middle age, midlife. In my mind, these are coming of age stories, just the way we might think about Huckleberry Finn or Katniss or other characters who kind of have to grow. But how might we grow in the middle of our lives? I'd like Andromeda to start with you on this one. How is this growing process when we're starting with grown characters?
I love that middle-aged focus because I think that in youth, the youth story is about fleeing and creating a whole new identity, and it's all about novelty and leaving everything behind. And what we're saying is in middle age, it's that the things you thought you left behind were not really left behind, which is what we're all agreeing about. And in this case, my character Ruth, she's a historian. So another thing we can add to this questions about the past is she's actually more comfortable looking at public history events, even traumatic events like the Holocaust, because that's at a distance. She feels no complicity with that. But looking at things, say, in her family, something her own mother might have done, her own neighbor might have done, or something she has repressed, that's harder to deal with. So I think tying that in with this middle life narrative, it is realizing that you never really did create a whole new identity, that you're all those selves, that people are more complex than you think, that you are probably complicit in more things than you think. And all of us have actually written here about history, about class, about race. I have Indigenous characters in my novel as well. And so we're all complicit in all of this. And you get to middle age and it can be overwhelming. You know, now how do I deal with all of this mistakes I made, the mistakes my family members made, our culture has made? And there comes a time of reckoning.
Mm-hmm. And it's not easy to shine the mirror back on us, ourselves, or our society. Nancy, what about you for this sort of middle years story?
Yeah, I like what Andromeda said about complicity, because I think that's a big story with Ruth in my book. It's kind of ambiguous whether she, is going to really take responsibility for what she did in terms of walking away from her child, or if it's the fault of her grandmother for saying you need to walk away and leave this baby behind. And so in some ways she's complicit in where her life has ended up to. But the middle life point for me, I think it's kind of also like what you said about the complexity too, because I think when we're younger, everything is simple. It's black and white. You're either right or you're wrong with the choices you make. And so what Ruth, my main character, learns is that it's a lot more complex than that. And there are a lot more gray areas when it comes to that. And the other thing I think she learns is understanding who her grandmother is. Because a lot of times we think of our mothers and grandmothers only in the way that they can service us and parent us, but we don't think of them as having their own lives and identities. And so that's one way that Ruth grows too, is understanding her grandmother as a woman with her own unfulfilled dreams and desires and all that. And so she learns that on her journey.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Ilona?
That's interesting what Nancy just said, because it just clicked for me in thinking about Ruth's grandmother. What I was thinking about with middle age is that stage in life where that many women come to, where they are taking on others, carrying others, doing what they think is right for others all the time. So whether that's children or partners, or taking care of parents as they age, or for mentoring younger people at work if you're in a leadership role. The constant, as you become more experienced, you take more people on, and people ask for advice, and you make decisions, and you give more strength, and people need more from you, and you give it and you give it and you give it. But then there comes a point, like there came for Gigi, where she was carrying everyone and she didn't know how to say this is enough. And she didn't know how to say, I'm going to allow you, in this case her husband, I'm going to allow you to help me. That I think in middle age is a point where we have to understand to ask for help, because we're constantly being relied on within our families or by other people. But allowing people to help us is a tough lesson to learn. And that's the lesson Gigi needs to learn, that being strong also means saying, I'm carrying enough, and also please help me. But in middle age, when we carry so many people, I don't know that we get that opportunity. A lot of women don't.
Oh my goodness, can I just respond to that? Because I wouldn't have put that part together, which is that I also have a character, Ruth, who's not good at asking for help, won't accept help. And I've given her this historical mystery, a journal and letters. And, that's kind of the fun and games part of it, trying to solve a mystery. But the truth is now she has to reach out. She has to call people, email people, use the expertise of a teenager, because she has just built up all these walls. She's also recovering from a car accident, physically suffering, mentally suffering. And so she doesn't know how to accept help. So I love seeing that actually in all these books. And Nancy, I think in your book too, when somebody has a mystery they have to solve, suddenly they have to go out in the world and ask for people to help them.
And we don't want to ask for help. It's so
especially
hard.
women. We women don't want to ask for help.
It's the best gift if we take something away from these stories, which is we're not alone and we can ask for help. I do want to remind our attendees that there is a Q&A function. So Joe mentioned earlier, either look at the top of your screen or at the bottom and put your questions in there, because I will ask questions all night if I'm allowed. But I do want to give our attendees a chance to put a question in the Q&A. And Joshilyn Jackson has sent in a question. So I do want to just interject because I think it's perfect right now as part of this conversation. And she said, she loves these books. They're in very different ways. They play into the idea that the past is alive in the present. And did you think of the past more in terms of plot, character, or theme as you brought these stories to life? I think that's you can tell it's a question from one writer to others. So did you think of the past in terms of plot, character, or theme as you brought these stories to life? And how about Nancy, you go first?
Yeah, I'm trying to go back in my process and think about, I never really start with plot, to be honest. So it's not that one. Character is really where I tend to gravitate, and have more character driven stories. And so I'm really thinking about the character, who that character is, what are her wants, her desires, what are her motivations. I think a lot about backstory anyway. Like that's a big part of my process, is thinking about what made Ruth, for example, who she is. Same thing with Midnight. What made him the boy that he is and he's become. And so I'm constantly looking at the past to help me to explain and to understand who the character is today in the story. So for me, it's really about character.
About character. How about either of you? Is it a leading question? Is it character? But your stories are also very plot driven.
True. I'm trying to think about it actually, because I want to say that they were driven by the character, because I always feel driven by the character, similar to what Nancy said. I don't start with plot either, but now that I think about what my process was here and the way that I wrote this book, I think, I had a series of scenes about a mother, and I had to figure out a way to connect them. And that's when past came in and helped me to do that. So even though I'm not someone who outlines or who thinks about plot points or who does any, I write very organically. I think what happened for me is that I knew I had this woman, I knew what she was doing, but I had to figure out what it was that connected all these activities and all these parts of her life. So I think it snuck in there. I was going to say character, but actually I think it like snuck in there. it was for the plot.
We always have a process, and then the process takes over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I love that, the character is still at the heart of your answer, but sometimes to get to that, you're using the plot, which is beautiful. And this is why these 3 books, for those of you listening in who haven't read them, are amazing choices. If you're in a book club, you and your 12 best friends and your 20 best friends will enjoy kind of dissecting what happens, and we'll come away with something different. I don't think 2 people will read any of these books and feel like this is the one answer that we were given about how to be, how to react, how to reflect. So that's great. Andromeda, what was your process?
Yes, I'll give a different answer. I was really interested in that because Ilona in particular, I was curious if 9/11 came first. Sounds like 9/11 came after as a way of understanding the character. So in my case, I was starting with a real person. And Annie Oakley is really only about maybe a quarter of my novel, but that was the seed. And it was specifically finding out that she had suffered this abuse, definitely physical and perhaps more than that, because before that point I had no interest in Annie Oakley. She was a cartoon character to me, that, you know, an icon that it just didn't interest me. Once she was complicated, then I thought, okay, she was basically held captive for 2 years, and then later she became this incredibly strong woman, businesswoman, probably America's first ever woman celebrity, the world's perhaps first international woman celebrity. So I wanted to connect those things, but that's only a quarter of the novel. So it had to start with plot, but then this is for her a revenge narrative. I will give you a spoiler. This novel has speculative elements in her story. I'm just going to say it. There's time travel. Probably better that people know that. And
Yay.
so the question is, what is she going to do? Is she going to go, if she can go to the past, what is she going to do when she gets there? Now, you can read the novel differently. You can read it as all trauma, the reaction to trauma, like PTSD, actually feels like time travel. It feels like vividly revisiting the past. So you can read it that way as well. But so for me, then I go from plot to theme, because theme then is what is the cumulative meaning of the novel. It's really, how do we deal with the past? How do we grow? How do we resolve these things? What is the meaning of this in the end? So theme, even though I don't write at the beginning of a novel with theme in mind, it is the question, is what I'm trying to discover. And I never know what it's going to be until the end, or perhaps the end plus several revisions. And then I finally know a little bit more what the novel's about.
I was just going to jump in and say that happens to me all the time, that theme seems to emerge afterward. Even after I publish the book, there are some themes that people bring up that I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that, you know? Yeah.
I think you probably have like a internal theme, like a theme that's just inside of you that just seeps into what you write, whether or not you intend it to be there. So I like that, but I just heard the word revision, so I feel like I have to ask, do any of you feel comfortable saying how many revisions you went through before we get these beautiful books? And everyone's face just got a little panicked, but I'd love to know.
Endless. The answer is endless revisions. How do you even count?
So many.
I know, I can't. I mean, there have been so many that, yeah.
Are any of the final products what you had hoped the book would be? Or did you think it was going to be a different kind?
I had written a completely different version of this book back in 2010, 2011. And it was such a complete failure. And it was actually motivated a lot by an autobiographical impulse, because there was actually sexual abuse in my family. And so there was a little bit of the Annie Oakley story. And then there was a story that was very much based on things that were happening in my family. And that storyline was not working at all. There was a very boring road trip off to Mexico. There were a whole bunch of things that were not working. And I put that entire book aside, feeling like I would never come back to it. But before I put it aside, this is something I've done a couple of times, in a fit of frustration, I wrote several different new openings with new characters, but some of the same elements, put that in a digital file, closed it up, opened it again 5 years later, after having written 2 other novels in between, and started reading this new chapter. And I could not remember having written it at all. I recognized, I was like, I know I wrote this from some of the word choices and the names of characters, but I couldn't tell where it was going. And so then it was what we call page 1 rewrite, where I was not cutting and pasting. I was just taking some of the ideas and really thematic concerns, which for me is a question of the old version, and starting over with a new version. And then that became this book. So it was a book I had completely given up on and really needed distance from, again, because I think of that autobiographical part that was too close to me.
Okay, that's fascinating. 5 years is a long time, but these days 5 years goes by in a blink of an eye. Ilona, what about you for revision?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So I mean, because I was thinking about what you said about, is it the book that you hoped it would be? And I came to writing as such a it's just so unexpected for me. I mean, in terms of the book that I hoped it would be, I'm amazed that there is a book. I mean, I'm just gonna say that, like, it's absolutely mind blowing to me that a writing course that I started doing because I kept applying for law jobs, trying to go back to work after being home with my kids. I kept not getting hired. So I started doing this writing course because my self-esteem was really low, and I felt like my career was closed off to me and I had no idea what was going to happen. And that this, writing class that I was doing my words for at 5 a.m. in the morning and taking care of 2 little kids, I got taken down this road. So I mean, the revisions have been constant. They were constant. And because I'm so new to it, I did the thing you're not supposed to do, which is I asked everyone to read my book. I asked everyone to read my manuscript. I mean, 25, 30 people must have read my manuscript. Everybody read my manuscript, because I really needed the input of others. So the book has undergone huge transformations to get to this point. Because as my first novel, it was a massive learning curve for me. But it was a wonderful, really enjoyable process. And I'm just so, I'm astounded. I really am. No one's more surprised than I am that there is a book and that we're talking about it. Yeah, revision though, definitely. I mean, that's the whole story of the 4 years of getting to here.
Well, you're astounded and the rest of us are grateful. So, and I'm sure the 20 people who read your book are feeling pretty excited that they had early eyes on it. How about you, Nancy?
Yes.
Infinite.
Yeah, infinite number of revisions. It took me 6 years to write the book. And like Ilona, I didn't know what I was doing. It was my first time ever doing it, writing a book. So there was so much trial and error in the process. And I had 5 beta readers, so I didn't have 20, but I had, quite a few eyes. And then once it got to the editor, we did 3 rounds of revisions there. And I thanked her, I think, in the acknowledgments and also just on the phone for helping me to see the way I put it, helping me to turn what ended up on the page to make that match the vision in my head, and that's what I thanked her for, helping me to get to that point. But even when I look back at it, sometimes I'll read the book and I'll be like, well, I don't read it too much because there's so many things I'm like, oh, I could have been better, or I could have taken that to a new direction or improved upon that. And so it's never really going to, meet what I think is the perfect book in my mind. And so I think now I'm pretty much understand that I'm always going to be chasing that, but never really getting there.
Well, you all frame it though so positively when it's like a labor of love. And we have a great question in the Q&A. And just another reminder, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. Joe likes to ask the Kill Your Darlings question. So for the debut authors, were there characters or storylines that you had to cut that you wish you could have kept?
I don't know if it's a wish I could have kept, but I did have to cut some things, but I just did that early on when I was getting feedback from literary agents and such. So my story now, The Kindest Lie, has 2 point of view characters. That's Ruth, the engineer, and then Midnight, the poor young white boy. But when I first wrote it, I also had the perspective of Eli, her brother, as well as Mama, Ruth's grandmother. So I had 4 point of view characters when I first wrote the book, and then sent it out to agents to get feedback. And I heard that I needed to focus it in more. So that was a lot of, that was 2 darlings, big darlings I had to kill when you think about Eli and Mama. But the beauty of it is that because I had written an entire draft and done several revisions with it, with all 4 of them in there, I really got to know Mama and Eli so well that even when you read them through the eyes of Ruth, they were fully developed because I had spent the time getting to know them very well and writing from their point of view, points of view early on.
What do you think?
Well, there's so much cutting. I'm trying to think back to it. I don't think I cut any characters. I did cut scenes, though, scenes that I personally really enjoyed, like scenes in Kiki's workplace, scenes with her work colleagues, scenes between her and Harry. Like a lot of them had to go because they weren't efficient for telling the story. It's also the order in which I told the story completely changed once I started editing. So the opening, the birth scene, which is at chapter 6, was actually the opening of the book when I first started. So there was even though all those components were there, the story that I was telling changed as editing happened. And I think I wrote the actual opening. I must have rewritten that 10 or 12 times, I think. So yes, some darlings did get cut. Certainly a lot of the structure I had in place underwent a massive revision as well. But I think it's always for the good of the story. You always have to ask yourself that question, like, do you really need to be here? I mean, I love you, but not helping. You gotta go.
Yes, I love that. You can give to the scene, the character, and then you have to make them go bye-bye. Andromeda, the question's slightly different for you because having published before, were there characters or things that you were asked to cut that you fought for?
Well, first of all, let me say it's not different at all. It doesn't matter how many novels you write, because each new novel, you're back at square one. It never gets easier. And in fact, I've been really thinking about my revision lately. I revise a lot more now than I used to. My first novel was hardly revised at all. And now I'm spending like 90% of my time on revision. So I don't know if that's bad news, but here's a darling that I killed that now I actually think should have stayed in the book. So even though that way long ago iteration of the book that totally changed, most of it got tossed, there was a scene of the person who is closest to my historian character. Interestingly, Ruth, Nancy also has a Ruth. And she was going out to try to shoot a gun for the first time because she's researching the life of Annie Oakley and she feels like she should understand how to shoot a gun. And it makes her incredibly anxious, as it would make me incredibly anxious to be practice shooting. And that I think established a lot of important things. I ended up not having that in this book and in this iteration, this is the way the book is now. And I think I should have, because one thing that's not discussed a lot in these events when I talk about Annie and the Wolves is that gun control is a really big part of the story, especially towards the end. As a researcher, as a former journalist, I used to do immersion journalism where I would always do the things with my subjects. So if I was profiling a whitewater kayaker, I'd go whitewater kayaking. I'd go up in an ultralight plane. I would do dangerous things in order to write about them. But when it came to learning how to shoot a gun, I actually didn't do that. And I regret it. And I think I know why, because there's a lot of scary things about gun issues in my family's backstory. And so I wasn't comfortable doing that. And that influenced the novel, but I think it should have been in the novel. I think I should have shot a gun. I think I should have had my character shoot a gun. So that's a darling I think should have been in there.
Well, that's fascinating. Joe, thank you for asking that question, because it's when we are reading the book, maybe the books feel perfect. They just feel exactly right because we don't have the backstory of all the work you were doing, all the thought process. So from our perspective, it's perfect, but it's always great to know really the hard work that goes into these books that, you know, we carry around with us. And I'm still reading hardback paper I'm not reading digitally. And so these are books I actually can like hold close to me. So just know that your hard work is still, you know, we still cling to it and love what you have done. A question just popped into my head. So I'm going to ask it and give you all a moment to ponder, but you're mentioning some of the tougher parts and maybe the topic of gun control, but also culture. You alluded to, and all of you have characters who are between two cultures, and it could be present and past. It could be, you know, successful and maybe without resources, English and American society. And we know we're living in the gray area. Our middle years are the gray, so it's not one is better than the other. But I'd love to hear your perspective on what you learned about the differences between culture or perspective, since all of your books have people grapple with those topics. And maybe we'll start with the English and American dichotomy, if you don't mind.
It's, yeah, it was important for me to write about it because I think that it's been really fascinating for me living as an American in the UK, having a British family. I've lived here for 12 years now. There is a lot that I've observed as an outsider here. I think that Americans tend to assume that we know so much about the UK because our pop culture crossover is so great. But it's very different when you actually live in a place and are immersed in a place. And there were just so many things that I have, there are so many misunderstandings, there are so many differences in language. There are so many quirks, so many hidden things in British culture that I didn't know about, even being married to someone who's British. I mean, things still pop up. I've been 12 years, things still pop up that I'm like, what are you talking about that I'd never heard of before? So it's a really interesting, it was interesting for me to explore that. I think it gives the marriage between the two characters a different dimension because it explores one of the biggest differences between American and British culture generally, which is communication, particularly emotional communication and how that's conducted. So I think it added a layer and dimension to Gigi's story. I mean, it's a fish out of water, but it's also her exploring not just her own identity, but also how class is wrapped up in that. And I wanted to also explore how class relates to our identity, how it's wrapped up in culture, and how when we move, what happens? What happens to the old identity? Does it stay with us? Do we take it with us? Do people recognize it in us even when we appear in a new context, or we're in a new social space, or we're in a new cultural space? So yeah, those were really interesting issues for me to explore with her.
That's a great point. You know, our sort of the recognition between the two. And Nancy, you have something similar, and actually not just race, but also class. How did that inform your story?
Yeah, I mean, you have Ruth, who's really with a foot in two worlds, you know, in terms of not just her background, in terms of her life in Ganton, Indiana, the small town, and then the city, but also just being Black in America and walking that line between, you know, who she is with her friends and her family versus who she is when she goes into her predominantly white spaces that she works in. And, you know, you just see a difference there. You see this kind of tug of war between the two parts of who she is. There's a difference in just the way she talks and moves in the two different environments. I think also for me, there was a piece, the culture piece, as the author of this particular book, in terms of working with my editor at the publishing house on it, because I was introducing a new culture to her, you know, through the work. And so that was something I remember when she sent me my first editorial letter. It was 6 pages, single spaced. And of course I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I was freaking out. And you know, she asked about things about plot and character development and suspense and all that. But I knew I wanted to wait and address the issues of race and culture first, because those were going to be the hardest for me to have that conversation. And one example is at the opening scene, election night for Obama, I have a line in there where I say that Ruth is untwisting her hair and breathing in avocado and coconut and promise. And my editor said, well, she just moved into a new house. How about maybe she breathes in paint? And I was like, no, I don't want paint. You know, I want this to be connected to, you know, this sense of freedom, and connected to hair, because hair has such an important part, you know, of our culture and who we are. And so those were some difficult conversations I had to navigate when it came to culture, with even, you know, within the editorial house that I was in. And she was very good about it. As soon as she understood it and I explained it, it was not a problem at all. But still, it was about navigating culture for me as the author as well.
That's interesting because, you know, I was thinking specifically Midnight, specifically, you know, and we, you know, you are, as the author, bringing yourself into the conversation, and each of you have mentioned your clear personal connections to these types of characters, even though we know it's not you, but there's clearly a tie to what you have witnessed, what you have seen in your family, or maybe what you have experienced. And Andromeda, for you, the culture line, maybe it is, past and present, but there's still also class in either setting. The presence or absence of abuse or care in your upbringing creates a caste system, like who's had a healthy relationship. So what about culture for you?
Oh, there's so many. So I know I just have to pick one. But before I do, I just want to say both to Nancy and Ilona, the things you just talked about were some of my favorite parts of those books. It was the relationship, Ilona, of your main character and her British husband. That was wonderful to read as an American. And Nancy, as a white reader, there were things that I could understand, but it felt just a little distant from me. Like, let me just take an innocent example. A Black character talking about, using Vaseline so she wouldn't have ashy skin. Those sort of things wouldn't come up in a novel that I would write. And that's why we need to read beyond our groups. There's way more serious issues as well, but everything about hair, food, what people call each other, how brothers and sisters treat each other. It's all different. And that's why we need to read outside our bubbles. So thank you for that. So I'll come back to my book with just one. If I just could take one cultural issue, I would actually go back again to that attitude about guns, but looking at the past and the present. So in Annie Oakley's time, we were already past really the Wild West era, but one could still be forgiven for believing that, maybe guns could solve problems. That if you just had a gun and you're out on your little house on the prairie, that you could keep yourself safe. Although even if you look at Annie Oakley's day, there are 3 different presidents were assassinated in her lifetime, which is a point I make in the book, showing that things were getting a little out of control even then. But then bring that up to the present and look at that same attitude of, oh, if I just had a gun or, in my house, I could prevent bad things from happening, and what scenarios can happen that get out of control, whether it's misunderstandings or someone else getting the gun in their hands. So there's this American cultural issue about what guns are about. And that's even without me bringing race into it, because when you look at America and gun culture and what guns have really meant in our country, there's other books to be written about that, about why Americans believe that guns are so important to the culture. I'm getting in too deep, Nicki.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Look, this is why we're reading. I'm not reading to just like pass over, someone goes to the grocery store and saves a cat. Like, I want to think about things in a new way. And just what you said, I have to read outside of my sphere, or even sometimes I think things are in my sphere. So for those of you listening, I really do believe you should contact Tall Tales, go to your local library. Our libraries save us. Our libraries do so much more than give us books, but get these books and share them with your friends, because the conversations that will come from it are incredible. And I know we're near the top of the hour, so I do want to just give another last call out to any attendees who have a question. One came in the chat that just was asking, maybe if each of you just wanted to say an author right now that you are reading, or a couple who have profoundly affected you. So an author that you have, and then I'd love to close out with what's next. So authors you are reading and what is next for you. I'll let anybody go first. Dealer's choice now.
I'll go. My favorite and the one I've learned the most from has been Toni Morrison. I think she's just a queen of, literature for me. In terms of who I'm reading now, Zakiya Delilah Harris, who wrote The Other Black Girl, just released today. Very good book. So that's one. And then let's see who else. Jasmine Ward is another one I turn to quite often as well.
That's great. Ilona?
Right now I am reading A Women in Salt, which is brilliant. I'm also reading Olympus, Texas, which is just, the stories are just phenomenal. And there is a British author. I don't know if her book is in the US yet. She's called Selena Godden. She's written a book called Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death. So if you're looking for something really genre breaking, an extraordinary story, definitely look her up. Sorry, did you say, was there another question? Was it?
What's next for you? Are you still right? What might we expect?
Yeah, I have just just finished the last words of my second novel, which we're going to be editing. We're starting to edit now, which is really exciting. So hopefully that is coming down the line soon. It's another story of mental illness and motherhood and migration, and life in the big city. That's quite different to Gigi's story, but some of the same issues.
Excellent. And Nancy, did you say what was coming up for you?
I did not yet. So I do have a contract for a new book, also with William Morrow, HarperCollins. It's called People of Means. It's a dual timeline novel about an upper middle class Black mother and daughter, both of them coming of age at different national moments of racial reckoning. So one in 1960s Nashville, and then the daughter in 1992, Chicago and LA at the time of the acquittal of the 4 officers for the beating of Rodney King.
Wow. Okay. Well, we will definitely look forward to that. Andromeda, favorite authors, books that you're reading right now, and what's
Sure,
next?
I want to read those books because that's how I like to learn my history too. That's how I like to learn about it. I'll point forward instead of back in time to the next couple books that I'm going to be reading when I finally have a couple days of vacation this summer. I've been reading a ton of thrillers because I've been working on 2 different thrillers over the last couple of years. And so I'm looking forward to reading Joshilyn Jackson's new book.
Yes.
Yes. And then there's another one by May Cobb called The Hunting Wives Club that looks like just a lot of fun. So I'm going to go away for a couple of days by a pool, and I think that's going to be perfect for that. And as far as what I'm working on, yes, I have a finished thriller manuscript, which is it's set in Guatemala, based on experiences I had there. And it is about a mother investigating the death of her daughter, who happened to be working at a writing retreat, a memoir retreat. So it brings in issues of, it's a thriller, but there's also some writerly issues in there as well.
That's incredible. That is incredible. Well, thrillers are actually quite calming for me these days. I didn't enjoy them when I was younger. I wasn't into mysteries and thrillers. You know, it's just straight romance, straight sci-fi. But feel tense. I want to see someone like running through the woods with like a serial killer chasing them. That's very soothing for me by the pool this summer. So, and also these complex stories, it does make me feel not alone. So I cannot thank you all enough for this conversation. I think this has been fabulous. I want our attendees to get these books. Please read these books. They're amazing. I am known in my community. I have 4 kids and I'm at soccer like constantly. So I'm either here at my computer or on the soccer field. And everyone on the soccer field comes up to me and they look inside my bag. They're looking for the books I'm reading because they know I usually go with 3 books, even though a game is only an hour and a half long. And I'm like, I don't know how long this game could be. I might need to read 3 books tonight. So I'm going to tell everyone about these books. I want to let our listeners know that next week I will be speaking with the authors of Daughter of Sparta, The Witch's Heart, and Ariadne. So 3, I mean, this is a good book for reading. I feel like the past year we are owed this 2021 of good books. They're great, excellent books coming out. And for the 3 of you coming from different time zones, different cities, to meet with us in Georgia with the Georgia Center for the Book and the Decatur Book Festival in partnership with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the DeKalb Library, Emory University, so many lovers of books in Georgia, Atlanta, all across the country and world. We could not put on events without our attendees and without you wonderful authors. So thank you for becoming my friends and giving us these new wonderful stories.
Thank you.
It's been
Thank
great
you.
to meet you.
It was
all.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So nice. Thank you so much.
Happy summer, everyone, and please read. We'll see you next week and next time.